Hey Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You look like you're in a log cabin in Peru. Please tell me where you are.
It is kind of a log cabin. It's an old post and beam. It's far from Peru, unfortunately. I think I might rather be there these days.
Oh, literally though, for real,
just
for real.
I mean, after watching this craziness last night, no, we're in Berkeley, California. Actually, it's a small cabin tucked in at the base of the hills. We moved out of San Francisco 2 years ago, and it's been a nice way to make it through COVID, actually, outside the city.
Yeah, totally. We actually are trying to get more FemTech voices out of South America. It was one of besides Antarctica, it was our last continent to get subscribers at. So listeners, if you are in South America, hit us up because we want to know what's going on down there. Speaking about Peru.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I have some cousins that live down there and have visited quite a bit. Lima is a really interesting city. So, and he's actually an entrepreneur. So, there's a lot of interesting things going on down
All right, Taylor's cousins, please subscribe. Get us more South American listeners, please. Okay, support your cousin. Um, well, I am so excited to have you on the show today. We always like to kick it off with a little bit of background about the entrepreneur themselves, or the thought
Sure.
leader, right? So most of us don't just grow up saying we're going to do femtech, and especially not men usually, right? And so we love having male guests on. So give us your scoop. What's your background? Where are you from? What did you study? And how did you end up here?
Totally. Um, well, so originally I'm from the East Coast. I grew up in Boston. Actually, it was about an hour south of Boston in a little town called Marion. Went to med school out there, and then came out west to do my residency. I did my residency in clinical pathology at UCSF. I worked with a doctor initially named Charles Chu to develop a test that would identify any pathogen in a human sample. And the goal of that was to really make infectious disease testing much more streamlined. And what we ended up doing was developing a test that's now actually used by the CDC for outbreak detection. So had COVID been discovered in the United States, they would have used this test to find it. And
Whoa.
it's been really interesting seeing the shift in terms of, I mean, this was something that we had predicted back in 2010 when we were doing this work. We were analyzing samples from H1N1, and we worked on new diseases from Western Africa and things like that. But yeah, it's been really interesting seeing this actually come to fruition and see how we all deal with it.
Really quick sidebar here, because my listeners know I love to do this. So I have a minor in public health, and I studied emerging infectious diseases. I love bacteria. I love viruses. They are the coolest. And it was very strange, and it still is, but especially in the beginning of this COVID outbreak, it was like, oh my God, like the public health student in me is so interested and fascinated and kind of excited. But then the human part of me is like, oh my God, people are dying. This is horrible. But there was like this weird tug where I was like, this is the thing we studied. This is what we studied.
right.
Do you feel that way too?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's really too bad. I don't know. Yeah, I'm of two minds in that same way. It is something that we were preparing for and that we want, the test that we developed can now identify things like this in about 10 or 15 minutes. So we have the tools to do it. I think it was really heartbreaking to see that they weren't rolled out effectively and to see the response. I think that's been the hardest thing to watch, is that knowing that we have the ability to deal with this in a far better way and seeing it play out the way it has been really difficult. And what, yeah. So
I feel the same way about femtech. I mean, there's so many opportunities to help women's health and wellness, but there's this lack of rollout because of lack of funding, or people that are thinking, well, women are fine. They probably don't even care that they're in pain all the time, right? Or all these other things. So it's like,
crazy.
How many intelligent things are just sitting on a bench somewhere, right? So many tools or drugs or devices, that could be helping women that we just need to roll out. So that's what we're trying to do here, right, on this podcast.
It's
Come
awesome.
on, get it out there.
Yeah, it's great.
Right.
And you've interviewed such great people.
I can't even believe it myself. I love my guests. So sorry, totally segued you off of your story. We're scientists. I anticipate doing this several more times. So please
Okay.
continue with your story.
So after doing a bunch of work in infectious disease and outbreaks, I actually turned to working on cancer.
Mhm.
So using the same sequencing technology and algorithms, focused on trying to make cancer sequencing and sequencing in general more efficient. I don't know if you remember the graph from the NHGRI showing the drop in the cost of sequencing, and it was going faster than Moore's law, right? This
Yeah,
is
I use that graph a lot in my Faramore pitch decks about how cheap it is, and soon all the dating apps are going to have a DNA test. And yep, totally.
right. Yeah, well, the corollary there was that all of the algorithms, most of which had been developed by bio PhDs, were breaking because the amount of sequence data that was coming in was growing so quickly, orders of magnitude.
So much data.
So after I finished with the work on infectious disease, went over to Berkeley and worked with a guy named Dave Patterson to build a group of computer scientists to focus on those genetic algorithms. And we built algorithms that could do sort of 3 to 6 orders of magnitude faster processing so that we could enable that to happen.
I am so grateful for data scientists because during my PhD in genetics, I tried to learn how to code, and I do not have a personality type to figure out after 6 hours that my slash was the wrong direction in the algorithm. I just can't do it. And so I am so grateful to the coders of the world that can take my DNA data and then make a graph out of it. So thank y'all.
It's great. Well, I've been really excited to see a bunch of folks get involved in that.
Mhm.
That intersection between technology and genetics is really a fruitful one.
Yeah.
And that really led me to sort of the next thing when I finished my residency, left that group at Berkeley, and thankfully they're still going. They've built several really great open source tools since then. But I connected with 2 serial entrepreneurs who had been executives at both Google and then Twitter to build a company called Color Genomics, which was dedicated to making genetic testing a part of primary care.
Mhm.
And what we did, I think Color did really 3 things. We were able to drop the cost of sequencing, right? And part of that was that graph and the acceleration of tools. The second thing that the company did was to enable doctors and patients to connect and to redo that process because genetic testing reports are typically written by genetics PhDs, who, as you know, are really smart, but aren't often focused on making things understandable, right? Understanding those papers can be pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And so, so we just made it easy for both the patient and the doctor to understand, and that report became the starting point for a really great conversation. The third thing that Color did was enable women to get tested and then the population in general to get tested after that. And it was really, as you can tell, I've been wandering a little bit in my career over the past 10 years, but it was that experience at Color over the first 3 years that really convinced me that I needed to start the Cusp. Um, you know, what Color did really well, I think, is we created a product that nailed it and that met a really important need in medicine. The thing that was difficult to watch is that while Color is now the largest medical genetic testing company in the U.S. Outside of say 23andMe and Ancestry, which are more on the consumer side,
Mhm.
it it will be probably 10 years before genetics becomes a part of primary care.
Yeah.
And so, and the reason for that is that doctors don't change the way they practice very quickly, right?
Mhm.
You have to knock on a lot of doors, go to a lot of conferences, do that kind of thing. So, after Color, I wanted to start a company that would really change the way that we practice medicine, because I think that is the next step in sort of our evolution as a healthcare system.
Absolutely. Yeah. Healthcare delivery innovation has been really interesting to learn about in this femtech industry because, like we said in the beginning, there's all of these solutions that exist. There's all
Mhm.
these women with issues. And then, like that, usually that person in the middle is the physician. And so physicians are overworked. They only have 10 minutes per patient. Like, how are they going to learn about all these new digital tools? And so, yeah, healthcare delivery, so interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you outlined all those issues because it's really, I don't blame doctors at all. I think it's
Mm,
just a system that we've created that does not align incentives correctly
yeah.
and doesn't give physicians the time that they need to actually treat and help patients, right?
Yeah, my
So,
co-founder is a pediatric gynecologist. We're definitely pro MDs. We do not blame the MDs out there. We know that they
that's
want to
awesome.
help, right? Yeah.
Definitely. So that was the first goal. And I think, I think I've been sort of on the fringes of FemTech, if you will, for probably, 8 years now. One of my mentors at UCSF was a woman named Laura Vantbier, who's really a pioneer and a giant in the breast cancer space.
Mhm.
And, she's built a company that does one of only two tests that can help determine whether a woman needs chemo. She's a professor at UCSF. She runs the iSpy trials. She's really done a lot of great stuff. Um, and through Color, that influenced us at Color in terms of some of the early work that we did. And our first test was for breast and ovarian cancer risk.
Mhm.
Our early adopters were women 35 to 55, taking care of kids and parents. And I really got to know that segment over the 3 or 4 years that I was there. And I think the story that I tell that sort of encapsulates a lot of that is a short segment that I did with one of our early adopters from San Diego. This was a 35-year-old woman who had 2 kids, knew she had a risk of breast cancer because her sister had had it, and I think her aunt had died at a young age from it. And she was very intent on getting tested. The test at that point cost $4,000, and she had been denied 3 times by insurance. So when Color came out, dropping the price from $4,000 down to $249, she bought it immediately. As part of her workup, she had her ovaries out and found out that she had stage 2 ovarian cancer.
Wow.
And that was really powerful. We now have hundreds of testimonials from customers like that who, these are women who really keep after it, and they're willing to pay for help when they find it. They really value it. And this woman saved her own life, right? Because she really kept after it, even when the medical institution said, no, we're not going to pay for this for you. You don't meet our criteria. You're not at risk. And so I
Moving
felt
to
like,
Peru, right?
yeah, or actually, I was on this, I was on one of these sort of health tech founder calls the other day for Lightspeed, and a bunch of people were talking about their experience with the Indian healthcare system
Mm.
and how much better healthcare is in India. Like, this guy had broken his arm. I think he was flying from Africa to India, got an appointment basically on the plane, showed up, walked right into the doctor's office. The doctor talked to him for a little bit, took him next door, did the x-ray. He was done, and it cost him $15,
Yep.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, and Cuba actually is another example where I think we do, they have really great healthcare. They train most of the doctors actually that end up going through South America, or they did in the past. I'm
Wow.
not sure what the funding situation is now. But when I was in medical school, we really used them as an example of one of the best public healthcare systems in the world.
Wow.
Because what they would do is actually assign doctors to specific blocks, and they would do house calls. And they were able to keep people a lot healthier than we do in this country.
Yeah.
So anyway, I've derailed us again, but there are a lot of great examples out there.
Yeah. And so you're at Color, you're like saving women's lives. You're like, I love science. I love innovation. Healthcare delivery needs fixing. So what is the Cusp?
Yeah, so the Cusp is really dedicated to helping women in this age group who are largely in perimenopause and menopause get the care that they need, and then to set them up for a better midlife. Women's health these days is sort of split into, say, 3 different phases. There's, the sort of early gynecology in your teens to early 20s. Then there's the OB who helps you from your mid 20s through the end of fertility.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this big gap, right? And you don't see, there's no one that specializes in women's care other than, say, a gynecological oncologist or a geriatrician who sees you when you're 80. So we're really trying to create this healthcare specialty that doesn't exist and provide it for women who are age 40 to 70. The way that we have designed the Cusp so far is essentially it's a platform that includes, it's a website with, we have a chat function, and we have articles, and we have a number of different tech-enabled services for women. that are available, including virtual care. So we can do telemedicine visits over video, provide prescriptions as well as supplements. And we intend to be sort of that integrative center that women can go to for this kind of care. What we found is that 4 out of 5 OBGYNs are not trained in caring for women going through perimenopause and menopause.
Which is insane. Like they literally are specializing in women, and then they only specialize up through fertility. And it's like, what? No.
Yeah, so it's great. Well, and they think of themselves as taking care of women through having babies. After that, it's like that's somebody else's specialty.
Yeah.
And so it's again, there's this missing specialty, and what we've done is pulled together all the specialties that touch on this, because OBGYNs aren't trained, right? We've brought in neuropsychiatry, we brought in internal medicine as well as cardiology, dermatology, mental health. And we've also brought in integrative medicine and naturopathy, because there are a lot of women that want both natural as well as medical solutions. And so we want to meet them where they are. We think that ultimately hormones are a good match for a lot of women, but that if they want to start with black cohosh, that we want to provide the best there. And so we've built these integrated protocols where a woman can connect with one provider who can provide all of that care for them, rather than having to go to 3 or 4 different providers, getting medication from one, getting supplement from another, and then trying to figure out how to pull it all together.
Yeah. And is it live? How long ago did you start this?
So we started at basically early 2019 was when the company opened its doors. We did an early beta in late October or November of last year, initially with just 50 women. And then we launched the service of expert care after that. That we offered for about 6 months. And then in July, we added a hormone test to enable women to predict time to their final menstrual period, because we were getting a lot of interest in it. And because I think women really want some agency over this. They want to understand what's happening with their bodies. They want to understand how long. Is it 2 years or is it 10 years? Because that's what your doctor will tell you. This is a 2 to 10 year process. Yeah. So why don't we narrow that down a little bit? Why don't we help you get some personalized care and understand this a little bit better? And that's now the first step at the cusp, followed by expert care to improve women's quality of life. And we're developing a maintenance plan that we'll be rolling out in a couple of months. And we can talk more about that later.
Did you ever think you were going to be leading a menopause endeavor? Like, you wake up in the mornings being like, I have found my calling. Like,
yeah, it definitely was a switch from genetics. I mean, I will say it was a big difference. But, when I saw this, I'd had some, my mom had a difficult experience going through menopause. She had vertigo, which is a rare side effect, but with the fluctuations in estrogen, some women get their vertigo triggered. And I watched
Really? I did not know that. I'm going to tell my mom, because we never talked about her menopause till I started this podcast. Now we do. But she actually started to suffer from vertigo a few years ago. So, my listeners know that I learn on the fly in this interview. So I'm going to tell my mom that. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, so vertigo as a symptom.
Definitely. Well, and just FYI, there are a number of other causes. My mom also had Meniere's disease, so she would get vertigo episodes without this, but it became really severe as she went into perimenopause.
Yeah.
And once she got an estrogen patch, it really went away. So that was sort of my early inkling on this. And then when I dove into this area, it just seemed like this massive gap in the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And when, thinking about starting a company that's going to change the way we practice, this seemed like the right place to start it. So yeah, I was I have become an unwitting menopause specialist, but very happy that I went into it.
That's so amazing. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's important. Women deserve to get support during this time of their lives, right? When there has been historically zero support, and they deserve technology, and they deserve the best kind of scientists working on this. What's your experience been like leading a future of personalized medicine through genetics, and now leading a women's health that isn't necessarily about fertility company? Tell us about some of your personal experiences. Like, talking to people about it? Like, how did they react? Like you as a man leading this, whereas you probably were never questioned that when you're doing just a genetics company. Like, what's that difference? Has there been a big difference?
Well, I mean, every company has its challenges, and I think any area that you dive into in healthcare, there's initially a lot of resistance. So the resistance in genetics was to offering this testing across the country,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we went into it, so when we started the company, it was right after 23andMe had been banned by the FDA.
Oh, I remember that year.
Right? And so we had a lot of specialists that and geneticists that came out against us
Mm-hmm.
because they had traditionally been the gatekeepers around this testing, and they saw this as a threat to their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's largely gone, but that took 6 or 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big controversy for a while. Even some of the folks that I trained with at UCSF, I was really disappointed to see some of my professors come out against us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ended up having a couple of pretty heated conversations with them about it, in which I still think we were on the right side of it, offering this testing to a broader set of the population. The idea that people can't handle the results, I think, it's a little misguided, right? It's a little too paternalistic for me.
Yeah.
So I think every company, particularly in healthcare, has its challenges, right?
Mm-hmm.
This one, definitely being a man leading a women's health company, I think people are like, why are you doing this? Are you trying to make money off of us? Are you, what's your motivation, right? Why would you help women? And I mean, I guess for me as a doctor, just taking a step back, when you go into medicine, you go into medicine to help people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this was an area that was really underserved, and we saw that there were a lot of people that were not receiving the care that they need. And so for me, it's pretty easy, right?
That's such
To
a
say,
crazy question to be asked. Like, why would you help women? It's like, why wouldn't I want to help women? We have
exactly.
one of our advisors is Dr. Faz Bashi, and he is actually, although he's the advisor to FemTech Focus, he's very bullish on, like, he just supports human health, because he's like,
Cool.
for me, it's not really about like, I'm going to just champion uteruses, it's like, no, I think everyone's health should be improved, and that includes women's. And so, yeah, we have had other male founders on here, and they have said, when they pitch to investors in particular, they say, like, well, why are you doing this? You can't be passionate about women's health, really, like, so what's the other, and it's like, what? How many women worked on freaking Viagra, like, and no, women
Right.
wouldn't be asked that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll take some time, I think.
Yeah.
And eventually, just like I think with the genetics thing, this will go away.
Yeah.
And femtech is a large enough space. I mean, I think they're saying now 200 billion, 300 billion. It's a large enough market that, of course, women and men are going to have to work together to make this work.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so I think it's one of those questions that will, come and go.
Good. Well, I am grateful for you being one of the first people to take on that question of why would you want to help women? Because I hope that soon that is no longer a question. It's an obvious, like, of course, everyone should care about women. So thank you for paving that path for future male founders in this industry. I wanted to dive into a little bit of science because I love it. So, you were talking about predicting menopause. Is it possible to predict menopause? And if so, how?
Yeah, so this is research that's really just come out in the last few years. There are several different ways that people have used to try and predict time. So typically the prediction is for the final menstrual period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your last period. Menopause is defined in retrospect, 1 year after that final period. So typically what people are trying to predict is that final period. Menopause then is 1 year after by definition.
Yeah, we talked with Angelo about menopause day. It's a day, right? It's like the last day that you bleed, that's the day, right? So, okay.
Yeah, totally. And so the ability to predict this has risen in the past couple of years. And I'd say where it's going is it's a combination of factors from the clinical side, so symptoms, menstrual history, things like that, and the hormone testing side. And the interesting development, the sort of science geek in me, loves that we're using these hormones to for a number of different things, including that prediction to final menstrual period. Specifically, the most relevant one is a hormone called AMH, or anti-Müllerian hormone, that is most recognizable to women as being a part of IVF. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, so AMH roughly is an estimate of the number of eggs that are being produced in the ovary at any one time, and it steadily drops as a woman approaches menopause. So
Because
as fertility starts to wane.
Women are born with their set of eggs that they're going to have for the rest of their life, and so every month when they release one, they're going down a count, right? So that's what you're talking about.
Right. Well, and it's a little bit more complicated than that, in that you have a number of eggs that are sort of competing to be the one that ends up getting released, and AMH is released from a number of those active eggs. So it's actually not just the one egg.
Yes.
And
you're like, how many active eggs do you have competing to get into the fallopian tube? And like, the more racers you have, the more eggs trying to get out. It's like a signal of how many fertility. Listeners, you can't see his face. He's like, oh, you're trying, but no.
Well, it's just so hard to develop these metaphors that really work on the fly.
Yeah.
We're close, but you can think of it basically as roughly a measure of the number of eggs. And if you look out on the internet, there are a number of different explanations for how AMH works.
Okay.
We've developed this one that we include in our own reports. But the thing is, there are notable exceptions, right? Women can have children with a very low AMH level, so it doesn't always predict fertility. And likewise, I think women can have, particularly if they have PCOS or if there are other concomitant conditions that a woman has, she may have a higher AMH for a while, and then it can drop pretty precipitously. So it's not a perfect predictor, but it's much better than many of the other hormones, which fluctuate over the monthly menstrual cycle. AMH is very constant, and so we can use it to predict roughly when a woman is going to get her final period. And that works in sort of 9 out of 10 cases at this point.
Wow. And it's like a direct-to-consumer test that she would buy off of the website to take?
Exactly. So you can go to thecusp.com, and we have 2 offerings there. Our expert care service is on the main page, and then our hormone test is available as well.
Have you seen a huge uptick in the expert care because it's virtual? And right now, and during COVID, telemedicine is just booming.
Yeah, so our telemedicine service is doing better. I'd say the difficulty with it is that often women don't know what to look for. They don't know that it's there, right? They're looking for help. They're looking for care in some way, but they often don't know that it's an issue, right? I think most women don't know what to expect. I was listening to the podcast you did a few weeks ago with the founder of WellFem, and she talks specifically about how women don't have these conversations with their mothers, right? They talk about puberty, but they don't talk about menopause. And so they're not familiar with what's going to happen. And, there was another point she made about some women being very particular about the specific, sort of weird science or weird treatment that she's into. And so there's a variety of different things and this whole sort of a range of potential treatments that women are looking for. So there's a lack of education, and when they see the telehealth service that we've offered, often it's not clear what that is initially. Whereas the hormone test, I think women understand very very quickly that, hey, this could help me understand where I am and understand what I need to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for lifting that weight. It is always difficult when you are a founder creating a technology, a service, an app that is so new that you're literally educating the consumer as to why they should want this, But then once you cross that barrier, like hopefully in 10 years or so, any woman going into menopause is going to know more about it, and she's going to know like, oh, I need my telemedicine. Like that's what I should go to first. But right now you're like, we try to convince these consumers about this like new way of doing things. So again, you're lifting the weight there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of companies out there now trying to do the same thing. We have seen a rise in the number of companies in the space. And I think with the increased education that's available, I'm hoping that, within a year or two, this becomes much more mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only 29, but by the time I hit menopause, if you only had in-person appointments, I would not go to you. Similar to how I'm a millennial, and if you don't have an online scheduling platform, I don't want to book a time with you. So,
Totally makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and the care doesn't have to be limited to visits. I think, one of the real values that we provide as a telehealth service is that we can check in and modify prescriptions much more quickly than you can with your traditional doctor.
yes. Yeah.
And hormones and the changing hormones that women experience during menopause require those changes. And so it becomes a much more fluid conversation than
Mhm.
you would be able to have with your in-person physician.
Definitely. Well, actually, can you actually tell us more about hormone therapy?
Absolutely. So there's hormone therapy has gone through this major transition. There were 100 million prescriptions for hormone therapy in the United States in 2000. And right this year, I think they're expected to be somewhere between 6 and 8 million. So we've seen a
Wow.
radical drop. And
90%.
yeah, most of that came in the early 2000s with the release of the Women's Health Initiative.
Hmm.
So there was a massive government study that was done, mostly on older women, so women sort of even 60 and above,
Hmm.
that showed a link between hormone therapy and breast cancer. And that really scared everyone. And almost all physicians stopped prescribing hormones at that point. And we're still seeing the fallout from that today. There's a great book actually that was written by a man named Avram Blooming called Estrogen Matters, which is worth checking out, and talks about this story and the transformation and how we're actually moving back to hormone therapy now,
Hmm.
because I think we've addressed some of the issues that were in the original hormone therapy. So we were previously using conjugated estrogens and other non-bioidentical formulations, and the progestins we were using were an issue as well. Actually, that was the bigger association with breast cancer risk. What we're seeing now actually is with the estrogen formulations, estrogen alone therapy has been associated with a reduced breast cancer risk. So
Wow.
again, the tides are changing. Um,
Yeah, you're like, oops, actually, JK.
yeah, and I mean, this is really a JK moment where the second part of this is that the people that did the Women's Health Initiative study are coming out and saying, actually, we were wrong.
Yeah.
There isn't that association that we saw. There are in very certain circumstances in the way that we constructed that study, but there there's a huge shift in the scientific community in terms of how hormones are being thought of, and hopefully they'll go back to being mainstream use, because
Mhm.
these are substances that are produced by the body, and in fact this drop. So women experience about a 99% drop in estrogen as they go through menopause.
Wow.
And that totally changes metabolism in the body. It puts women at risk for diabetes, heart disease, osteoporosis. We're finding a link to Alzheimer's and certain types of
Yep.
cancer.
Yep.
And so hormone therapy, I think, should be an option for most women, provided that they don't have the stroke or other cancer risk that would preclude
Mhm.
it. And I think one of the real values of the test that we've produced is in helping women decide when they should start that therapy if they're
Mhm.
interested.
Yeah. Well, I can already hear some listeners saying like, but that's not natural. That's not natural.
Totally.
But it's also not natural for humans to live longer than like 40 years old, you know? And
Right.
so the fact that women are living half of their lives post with 99% less estrogen is also like evolution has not caught up. And I actually studied evolutionary genetics, and so I have a lot of opinions about how we are not evolving anymore. The best example is if we were still evolving, everyone with glasses would be dead, because you
Yep.
wouldn't be able to see and you wouldn't be able to eat or commute, blah blah blah, right? And so people with terrible vision are still reproducing, so we're not really evolving, y'all. So here we have like half of a woman's life with this really unnatural 99% less estrogen. That's crazy. So well, that's also really interesting. I it's always kind of sad when science publishes something and then later has to go back, but that's also part of discovery and research. And the most important part is that scientists can put their hand up and admit it, right? Like that's the most important part. And now it's just kind of getting the society back on board with it. So random question, I just came to me. So you know how insulin, they like have bacteria make insulin?
Yep.
Is that how they make estrogen? How do we make estrogen?
So, well, no, I think estrogen can be synthesized in the lab today, and
Okay.
it's bioidentical estrogen. So it's the same estrogen that's produced by your body, by your ovaries, and by your adrenal glands. But previously, and this is part of that story. Previously, they were producing estrogen from horsemare urine. So, and that was part of the issue, is these unnatural conjugated estrogens were
It was coming from horse urine. Oh my
yeah.
God.
Yep. So hormones that were previously taken now, and it's still out there, but it's less commonly prescribed.
Yeah.
Up until the 2000s, was predominantly produced by horse urine.
Wow. When you find out where stuff comes from, I mean,
yeah, bacteria starts to sound okay, right?
yeah. Also, the scientist who was like, I have the protocol, y'all. Like I own a farm and I figured it out. That's hilarious. Well, this has been so interesting. Is there anything else you wanted our listeners to know? Because menopause is definitely a hot topic on this podcast. Our listeners are very eager to see the innovation. So I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else I didn't ask about for menopause that you want to get across to our listeners.
Sure. Well, I would say come check us out at The Cusp. We have a lot of great articles. We're starting to put up videos. So, if you're interested in learning about it, there's a lot available on the site. And then in a couple of weeks, for World Menopause Day, we're actually putting on a symposium that is all virtual this year. We've got some of the top medical and scientific experts coming from across the country. We're putting it on in conjunction with a scientific group called AHA, Advancing Health After Hysterectomy. And we're going to have the president of the North American Menopause Society, as well as really some of the top experts talking about these issues, the controversies associated with hormones and menopause. We're going to have a track focused on hormones in the female brain, including Luann Brizendine, who wrote The Female Brain. She's one of our medical advisors, as well as some others. Pauline Mackey, who's very well, her research has been really foundational in this space. And then the third track that we're going to be doing is on sexual health in this time, because it's a big issue for a lot of women. So come check us out at thecusp.com. Our symposium is coming out. It'll be the 15th through the 18th of October.
When is National Menopause Day?
It's called World Menopause Day, and it's the 18th of October each year.
All right. I'm writing that down. We're going to make a thing about it. That's awesome. Wow. Thank you so much. That is so interesting. I am going to talk to you after this interview about like potential attending it. Like that sounds
for sure.
Super fascinating. It's so funny you bring up World Menopause Day. I was thinking, how do people make national holidays? Could FemTech Focus make a World FemTech Day? This is what I think about in the shower, y'all. If you ever wonder, what does Brittany think about her spare time? Like, how do I make National FemTech Day?
You should put it in October, because October is like Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It's World Menopause. I think it should become a month.
Yes. Oh my gosh. My branding advisor is going to kill me, because now I just remembered that women usually dye their hair pink in October, right? For breast cancer awareness. She's going to kill me because I changed my hair color a lot. And she's like, we have to change your website now. But sorry, Sahar. I might dye my hair pink. Oh, man. Well, this has been so awesome. I want to ask you two last questions that our listeners love. The first one is, we have a lot of aspiring founders that listen. What's an area in women's health and wellness that you think still needs innovating?
Gosh, I'd be hard pressed to figure out an area that doesn't need innovating.
It's a trick question. Yeah.
It's everything. I will say there's been a lot of improvement around IVF infertility. I think people have started by chasing the money there, because they know those procedures are well reimbursed. So I might not start there, but I think in everything from, hormones and menstrual care, you know, early, I think, um, particularly for teens and early 20 somethings, there's still not a lot of great care. Most of the focus has been on sort of women 25 to 35. So whether it's modern fertility or TIA or, you know, there's a ton of IVF companies that have come out for there.
Mhm.
I think earlier than that or later than that, there is a ton. PCOS is a major area that needs a lot of help. I'll throw out a shout out to Heather Bowerman at Dot Lab, who's done a lot of really cool
Hot
work there.
lab, yeah, yeah.
And there's some great new stuff coming for that, but that impacts a large fraction of women, and still needs a lot of help and support. So there's a whole bunch of I think, you know, sort of pseudo conditions that haven't adequately been identified by physicians yet that need a bunch of help, and
Mhm.
that would be a great starting point. I'm also happy to talk more with anyone who's interested. So
Awesome. How would they reach out to you? Just like your info at the cusp,
Taylor at thecusp.com.
Taylor at thecusp.com. So listeners, a sneaky, sneaky trick. As a previous founder myself, the founders are usually customer service for the first few years. I know I was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Secret, okay.
support at thecusp.com also works.
Yeah, yeah. I always found it so funny when people message Fairmore info at Fairmore. Can I speak to that? And I'm like, oh my God, it's just me, y'all. I'm just me, right? It's hilarious. Well, and our last question is, what does the femtech industry as a whole need the most right now in order to be successful?
Um, I think it still needs more investment, and I think it needs more support from the VC community.
Hmm.
It's coming,
Hmm.
but I don't think, you know, there was an article in Forbes earlier this year that VCs are finally ready to talk about menopause.
Yes.
I don't think that they've really shifted into this market, nor do I really think they understand it yet.
Mhm.
And it's massive, and it needs additional support. I think there are a lot of really passionate people that want to make a difference,
Mhm.
and we need the money to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the single biggest thing that still needs help. And certainly in my pitches, um, you can tell right away whether a VC is going to work out or not. I mean, I've
Yep.
had a lot of them are, you know, you talk to, you know, most VCs are still, you know, 80, 90% male.
Mhm.
And you walk into the room and they're like, menopause, that's an issue. And they'll be, you know, if you're lucky, the guy will be like, well, I talked to my wife and she didn't have a problem with it. So I really don't think
Yeah.
this is a thing. And I think that needs to change.
Yep.
It's happening, but it, you know, that's the biggest thing.
Well, that's why FemTech Focus is raising our own venture fund, because I'm here always preaching that,
Awesome.
if you want to make money, invest in women's health and wellness. And so I'm in this for the good of women, but I'm also like a previous investor, right? And like, this is the smart move. But also, I'm tired of founders having that experience of investors saying this isn't an issue when it's like very obviously the issue. I'm also a big believer in your investors should also be your biggest champions and supporters. And
Yeah.
if you've managed to convince a VC to invest in you, but they have zero experience in women's health, that's not very helpful. Like, you got money, but you don't have any advice. And so that's why FemTech Focus, we're raising our own fund to lead the charge, get it funded,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
Taylor, this has been so awesome. Thank you for all you do. Talk about menopause, one of our hottest topics. And please let us know how the conference goes. I want to come. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, please.
And we will talk to you soon.
That sounds great. Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And thanks for doing this podcast, raising your fund. It's really amazing work.